All right, well, thank you. Welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us on this Friday afternoon for an overview of the CARES Act. My name is Lauren Bender. I'm the Vice President of Business Operations and Finance for Valencia College and a part of the Executive Committee of COBA, who is sponsoring this event. I know the COBA team, led by Dr. Lynn Powers, is really pleased to bring this opportunity forward. Before I have our General Counsel, Dr. Maloney, introduce our speakers, I want to go through a couple housekeeping announcements, if I can. So housekeeping-wise, I appreciate those that provided the questions in advance. We had a pretty lengthy list of those, and has been provided already ahead of time to Jim and Christina. And I know they will do their best to try and weave any discussion or guidance into their presentation. In addition, if you have questions, please submit them through the Q&A tool, which is located on the bottom of your page or on your screen. I and a few others will be watching, and we'll try and get those questions to our speakers as time allows. We'll do our best to answer all the questions. If we're not able to get them, we'll answer them individually with responses. A legal disclaimer here for you. The provision and receipt of the information in this presentation is not legal advice, does not create a lawyer-client relationship, and should not be acted on without seeking professional counsel who have been informed of the specific facts. Included, you can use the contact information we can provide for Jim and Christina at the end of this as well. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Maloney, who will do the introductions.
Thank you, Lauren, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and happy Friday. We made it to another one. Let me introduce our speakers. We have a privilege this afternoon to have them. They're both active in NACUA, the National Association of College and University Attorneys, and they're respected voices in the national conversation on higher education legal matters. And both have proven to be very adept at handling ambiguous ambiguities, especially with respect to this ever-shifting CARES Act funding matter. First, Jim Keller. Jim is the chair of Saul Ewing Arnstein and Lair's higher education practice and K-12 schools practice. He's vice chair of the firm's litigation department and a member of the executive committee. He is a higher education lawyer, an ERISA litigator, and a complex commercial dispute trial lawyer. Jim also serves as general counsel to several colleges and universities that do not have inside counsel. In addition to his legal practice, Jim has served as an adjunct professor at the University of Delaware, where he taught undergraduate law courses. Christina Riggs is vice chair of Saul Ewing Arnstein and Lair's higher education practice. In this role, Christina partners with higher ed clients in their day-to-day operations by providing advice on student affairs issues, campus safety, the Clery Act, FERPA, state and federal discrimination laws, Title IX, Title IV, and many other matters. Outside of work, Christina is an avid runner and triathlete. She has completed numerous multi-sport distance events, including Ironman Lake Placid. I had to include that, Christina. Kudos to you. Let me now turn it over to our speakers. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Maloney, thanks very much, and Lauren, thanks very much. So this is Jim Keller, and it's nice to meet you all virtually on a Friday before a holiday weekend. I am not a triathlete. I did complete my triathlon of making coffee, putting the coffee in a cup, and drinking it today. That's about as much as I can do. I will let Christina introduce herself when she speaks. We're going to bounce back and forth today. So I think, Mary, we can advance 2 slides as Lauren had covered the disclaimer. Great, thank you. So here is what we're hoping to cover today in the next couple of hours. We want to talk through the history of the CARES Act and specifically the funds that relate to your institution and your students, what that means in terms of student aid, the institutional portion of the funding, the third tranche of money that relates to HBCUs and other institutions. A small portion of the funding is dedicated to you, and those of you who fall in that category are probably already aware of that, but we want to talk about what that means. And then we're going to do some Q&A. So we're going to, again, bounce back and forth today. As Lauren said, we hope this is interactive. We'll be looking at your questions throughout the day. As was alluded to, I think briefly, there was literally new information provided last night and can't make that up. So we had these slides all ready to go. And then at about 10 o'clock last night, the department posted some new information on their website that Christina and I don't think changes anything materially. In other words, if you've already distributed some of your money, and some of you probably had, I think you're okay, but it provides additional ambiguity and maybe additional flexibility for you. So that's the goal. We have a lot to try to get through, so I'm going to turn it over to Christina.
All right, thank you, Jim. Okay, so the timeline. I'm going to walk us through quickly. As you can anticipate, and as Jim just said, this timeline was expanded upon last night due to 3 paragraphs that the department issued. But before we get there, let's take a step back. So you'll see that we start with the timeline today at March 13th. So I understand that we probably have a lot of folks on here from the financial aid office and from other sectors of the institutions. And I do understand that there is other guidance out there about distance education and flexibility that came out on March 5th, updated April 3rd, and then later again, I think it was May 15th. So that's not the subject of what we're talking about today. We're really going to focus in on the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, which is a component of the CARES Act. And so we're going to start with March 13th. As we know, that's the date that the president declared this a national emergency. And then just a week or so later, we had the CARES Act actually issued. And so that was March 27th. It then took time for the department to actually get some of these funds out to us. And I think that created some of the issues and initial ambiguities that we saw, particularly around what do we do with our graduated students and things that we'll talk about in a little bit. It wasn't until April 9th that the secretary issued her letter and then later released the advance funds, which is that first 50% that would relate to the student portion. And then April 21st, we had another letter come down that was talking about the issuance of the institutional portion. But of course, on that same day, the department put 2 frequently asked questions just up on its website. And of course, that threw a lot of what we had thought based on the CARES Act and on the certifications that you each signed a bit into flux, particularly around student eligibility and whether or not those students had to be Title IV eligible, which was one of the biggest components of what we saw come out of those FAQs. Later, about 9 days later, the 3rd tranche came out that Jim talked about. We recognize that not everyone on this call is potentially receiving that 3rd tranche, but some of you are. And so we are going to devote a little bit of time today to talk about what you are capable of doing with those funds and what perhaps additional flexibility you have with those funds, maybe even more so over the institutional portion. And as we all know, then May 6th happened. So when we sign the certifications, right, there is a component in there that talks about, for actually all 3 tranches, reporting requirements, information that we're going to need to share with the secretary. We were waiting for that to come down in the Federal Register. That didn't happen. And then lo and behold, of course, on the same day that the 2,000 pages of Title IX regs hit, the department put up this May 6th IFAP guidance. And what this basically talks about is a website reporting that you need to do in relation to at least the student portions of the funds. So that's really where we thought we were as of 5 o'clock yesterday. And then I think it was roughly, I think Jim said 10, I think it was roughly 7:30 or so or thereafter, the department did this. We're going to advance one slide. So we're going to talk right now on 3 slides about 3 paragraphs and what the department basically either undid or just created more ambiguity in 3 paragraphs. We will show you a link later to the actual website. I'll point it out and let you know this is where it is if you haven't seen it. I didn't want to just put all the words up here. What I'd rather do is we broke it down so we can talk you through what these 3 paragraphs say to the best of our abilities based on what they've put forward. So the first paragraph goes through this pretty long statement that essentially says this: Remember those guidance documents that we gave you, those FAQs? Well, guidance documents really just represent our current thinking on a topic. And this next bullet is a quote, the second one. And this is important for enforcement mechanisms, right? They do not create or confer any rights for or on any person and do not impose any requirements beyond those required under applicable law and regulations. So what in the world does that say? It says basically this, that those guidance documents, they don't have the force and effect of law. And so the department essentially is saying, well, we believe what we said in our guidance documents, that is our current thinking, we will not take enforcement action for things based solely on those guidance documents. But you still have to comply with the law. And this last statement says, you still have to basically comply with everything authorized by law or as incorporated into a contract. So I think here's the takeaway. Those FAQs that we had been reading, they really did consume many of our thoughts for the last few weeks. What does this mean? What does that one mean? Which was the one that talked about online students, right? We were all trying to kind of parse through those FAQs. That still does represent the department's current thinking. But we were also looking at, hopefully, what the CARES Act actually says, because that still stands, and what your certificate or certification actually says, because you entered into that, you agreed to those things. And so that still stands as well. So we had always intended on discussing all of the documents, the FAQs, the certification, and the CARES Act. But to the extent that you have been focusing a bit more on the FAQs, I encourage you to go back and make sure you are rereading the actual CARES provision, which we'll go over today, and the certifications. Those do still have the force and effect of law. So let's go one more slide. And this is really the kicker. Right. So when I've been talking about the FAQs, probably the one that threw everyone into, or gave everyone a bit of a surprise when they came down, were those FAQs that talked about student eligibility, right? And this is specifically where the department came out and said, in order to receive funds under the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, that student needs to be Title IV eligible. Now, when they did that, a lot of people had the assumption that the department was really focused on the citizenship component of that, right? And carving out international, undocumented, and DACA students. What they did, though, was to say, you must be Title IV eligible, meaning you have to meet Section 484. If you've now, and I'm sure you have, become a bit more familiar with what 484 says, is there's a whole lot of components in there that go far beyond citizenship. So this threw in a whole host and category of students that would have otherwise been eligible. Examples of this would be students that were no longer enrolled, right? You were graduated students. That created a gray area. What about a student that wasn't meeting SAP? What about a student that had a drug conviction that might have limited their eligibility? A student that didn't sign up for selective services, right? And so they brought in this whole host of other students that didn't actually meet the Section 484 requirements, and thus, according to the department's guidance, were not eligible to receive these funds. What the department basically said, and actually comes right out and says, we will not initiate any enforcement action based solely on that statement. So what it says is, we still think, we the department think that the student should be Title IV eligible, but that's in our guidance document. It's not in the CARES Act. And so we will not initiate an enforcement action based solely on that statement. So people, I think when they were initially reading this, I saw a few things last night, so I want to be cautious, is this is great. We can give it to all of our students, right? Even those that are perhaps DACA or international. And I want you to be careful about that. There is a statement in that same paragraph, this is paragraph 2 now, that says, we are still going to enforce the underlying statutory terms, of course, in the CARES Act, and any other applicable statutory terms. And it cites this provision, 8 USC 1611. What that law essentially says is that certain, and this is the word, only qualified aliens are qualified to receive federal public benefits such as grants. And so the law basically says if someone does not meet the definition of qualified alien, then they would not be eligible. The actual definition of qualified alien, though not referenced here for your own purposes, will be later in that provision. It'll be 8 USC 1641. Essentially what that says is it still does perhaps carve out those students that are international, DACA, and undocumented. So while you might now have more flexibility for perhaps a student that withdrew or did not or graduated, or perhaps for students that were SAP, not meeting SAP, not signed up for selective services, you do have some more flexibility there. You might not have the same flexibility with some of your international DACA and undocumented students. So do be mindful of that particular provision to the extent you choose to make any revisions to the process that you were intending to put in place or perhaps already have put into place. So now we're going to go just to the last third paragraph, and there's of course a lovely kicker at the end, which Jim will get to. This talks a little bit more about the institutional fund, so I'm going to turn it over to Jim for this.
Thanks, Christina. So yeah, the first paragraph of this slide I think we've covered, which is they still are reiterating their guidance that they think these funds should only go to people who are Title IV eligible, while at the same time telling you, unless they are international, DACA, or undocumented, they're not going to take enforcement action. So they literally, as read, and you can see it on their website, it says, our guidance is just guidance, it's not binding, you should know that. So those of you who are, I'm paraphrasing, those of you who are complaining about our guidance should know this isn't actually the law. Having said that, we really think you should follow the guidance. So that's where we are in terms of students and whether this gives you, as Christina said, the ability to distribute funds to additional people. The next point, the other part of what was posted last night, the department did talk a little bit about the institutional portion of your funding. So we've alluded to it, but I guess we should just say it directly. There are 3 tranches of funding, right? There's the institutional portion, the student portion, and then there's tranche 3 for some of you. Regarding the institutional portion, last night the department emphasized that financial aid grants, if you decide to use your institutional portion for that, you still can't use your institutional portion to give money directly to international, DACA, or undocumented students. However, if you have already given refunds to students, and this is in the FAQ as well, so sort of drawing a line between giving new money directly to students versus reimbursing yourself for monies you've already provided to students. So what the department seems to be saying is if you have given money in the spring to refund expenses that your students incurred for housing or dining or something else related to coronavirus, you can use the institutional portion to refund yourself for that, even if that may include international students, DACA students, or undocumented students. So long as you are giving the money to yourself for money you've already expended, that's okay. And that's only for the institutional money, not for the student money. For the student money, you're just a pass-through. You're just getting that money from the government and giving it to students. For the institutional portion, you can choose to use some of that money to reimburse yourself essentially for refunds you've already issued to all of your students, assuming those relate to a disruption from the coronavirus. And that can include international students and DACA students. But you still can't take that institutional money and give it directly to DACA students, international students, undocumented students. And then finally, which is perfect really, The department said, by the way, we're still figuring out eligibility and more to come shortly. So here we are. There's been a law. You've all submitted certifications and applications. We've certainly looked at a lot of your websites. You've put up nice information on your websites, being transparent and explaining what all of this means. A lot of you have gotten the money. A lot of you have distributed some of the money. And the department is telling us at whatever it really was, 7:30 last night, we're still assessing eligibility, which is pretty remarkable. But we can only convey what we're learning from the department. So that's where we stand today on, I lose track of the days, May 22nd, I think, before Memorial Day. Okay, so Mary, can we go to the next slide, please? So as I referenced, taking a step back from last night's semi-bombshell, where we were intending to start the session today was just breaking down the student portion of the money and the institutional portion of the money. So we'll sort of, having given you the expedited information from last night, we'll reset and go through each of these categories of funds. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Christina to start with the student portion.
All right, thank you. So Mary, let's go one more slide forward. Okay. So what we've done with these slides is we have a catch-all in the beginning, just as a helpful guide so you have it in one spot. We reference the care sections that are implicated. So for this one, the student portion is mentioned in 18004A1. And then of course, use of the funds is that subsection C. But if you need to put your hands on it, it's right there. I told you I would reference the web page for you. Okay, this web page right here is where you're going to find everything. On that web page, there would be instructions if you hadn't already done so to fill out your certifications. It will have each of the department's letters as it relates to the 3 tranches. It will have the certifications as it relates to the 3 tranches. It will have the FAQs, of course, with the new language that we just talked about. It will also have links to the IRS guidance about the taxability of the student funds. It will have a link even to, I believe now it is just up and running, the May 6 IFAP guidelines. So really, to the extent you want to be tracking if the department is uploading anything, changing anything, or you just want to get your hands back on one of those documents, this is the link. So it's here for you. The key documents obviously are the act itself and the funding certification, right? I would have told you also the April 9th letter and the April 21st letter. I still think that they are relevant and important. You want to know the department's thinking on this, particularly because you are going to be reporting to the department. But I do want you to make sure that you read it in conjunction with the statement that was issued last night. And then of course, to the extent you weren't aware of it, the May 7th IRS Q&A about the taxability of these components for students. They're really helpful if you're creating FAQs to put on your own website for questions students might ask you. So let's talk about the student portion. So yes, we had that thing happen last night, which is every presenter's dream, right? To have something completely shift the night before. But what didn't change was what the purpose of the student portion fund should be. And really what these are meant to do, this is in the act itself, and this is in the certification that you signed. This is to go directly to the students for expenses related to the disruption of campus operations due to coronavirus. That's the phrase. Disruption of campus operations due to coronavirus. So one thing I want to call out and just be mindful about is, I've had many questions in the past over what does that mean? Everyone has been impacted by the coronavirus. Can't we just give it to everybody? Well, I would be mindful of that, right? So there is a distinction, and it's a notable distinction, about was someone impacted by the coronavirus, or did someone incur expenses because of the disruption of campus due to the coronavirus? They kind of sound the same, but there is a difference there. quite honestly, I'd be pressed to find anyone that wasn't some way, shape, or form impacted by the coronavirus. What these funds are intended to do is alleviate some of those expenses that students incurred because their traditional campus was disrupted. So their campus operations were disrupted. For most of them, that meant they were moved off campus and forced into a remote learning environment. And those eligible expenses, the department gives you the examples. Basically, things included in a student's cost of attendance. So food, housing, course materials, technology, healthcare, and childcare. That has not changed. That is still the component that you need to be sure you are confirming before giving one of these grants to a student. So let's move to the next slide. This is how we're going to break it down for the student portion. We're going to talk about student eligibility, which of course is, has an asterisk in it now. Expense eligibility. Then we'll break down some of the primary questions that we're seeing about the distribution method and the reporting requirements. So let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to break down student eligibility and expense eligibility, and then Jim's going to go into distribution process and some of the reporting requirements. So I kind of have already gone through how the statement of last night impacted some of this. Had you asked me yesterday, does the person need to be eligible under Section 484 in order to receive the funds? The answer was yes. Could someone on SAP suspension receive the funds? No. What about someone that graduated? I'm a very conservative person. I would have said, well, 484 says you have to be enrolled or accepted for enrollment. And so it's a risk. I think the graduated component part became a big issue because the department was fairly late in getting us the funds. I think it probably wouldn't have been an issue. And then dual enrollment, I would have said they don't have a high school diploma. And so they're all not meeting Section 484. I think now with the department's guidance, what they're saying is, our thinking is that we think that they should meet every Section 484 requirement, the whole kit and caboodle, but we're not going to hold you to that. We're not going to enforce it. And so I think you do now have, and I'm happy to say so, I think you do have some flexibility now to have better comfort in giving funds to some of your graduated students that were there in spring of 2020, as I know many schools did. You have some flexibility on students that perhaps had always been meeting SAP, but perhaps were not meeting SAP, and maybe even so because of our current pandemic. You have a bit more flexibility there. Undocumented, which is the second question, you still have that issue. As I noted in the 521 statement, you still need to be mindful of that provision, that act, that limits who can get public benefits. And that would probably exclude your international DACA and undocumented students. As a reminder, there's nothing to say the school cannot give their own institutional funds to those students. That's what a lot of schools have been doing. But as we said, and as Jim said in his piece, you would not be able to give these federal funds directly to those students. In terms of the online issue, and let me do FAFSA first, and then I'll go to the online issue. Do you need a FAFSA, right? So I probably would have said yesterday, and I know I would have said yesterday, yes, it's not a requirement from the department that you have a FAFSA, but it is difficult for me to understand how you would confirm someone's Title IV eligibility and the fact that they would demonstrate the ability to meet every component of Section 484 without a FAFSA on file demonstrating that eligibility. So I still think that is the most conservative approach based at least on the department's current thinking, as they call it. But given the flexibility that just came out last night, question whether or not you still would need a FAFSA on file. I still believe it's the most conservative way of approaching this, and it will be helpful for you to document your efforts, as you will need to do in your reporting efforts, and perhaps even if this becomes an audit issue. But that is an area that you will have to decide if the recent statement that went up last night changes your view on that. In terms of the online course program, so this is a question that we've gotten a number of times, and so let me frame where the confusion came from. The Act itself does exclude certain students that were enrolled in distance education. What the Act itself says is that when they were creating the allocation method, right, for how they determined how much each school got, it excluded students that were exclusively enrolled in distance education courses prior to the coronavirus emergency. The department was then asked an FAQ about that, and that would be the student FAQ 13. And what the department said was, if a student is enrolled exclusively in a distance education program as of March 13th, then they would not be eligible for the funds. So the Act uses the word courses, the FAQ uses the word program. There is no clear guidance on exactly what this means, or if anything in yesterday's statement changes this. But the leading thought is the spirit of this was to say, if a student was in one of those exclusive online education programs, such that they already were learning exclusively in a remote learning environment, then they were not disrupted in the same way. There was not a disruption of their campus environment such that they would have incurred eligible expenses. So that was the leading thought, and that continues to be the leading thought on the course versus program component. In terms of the eligibility expenses, the disruption of campus operations is the leading statement. That is what you need to comply with. The types of expenses, it is the ones that we listed on the prior slide, technology, course materials, food, etc. The biggest question here is, do we need to somehow verify either the incurrence or the amount? So the answer from the department is, no, you don't need to do an application process, but you need to make sure that these are going to students that incurred eligible expenses. So then the issue really becomes, how are you going to create a trail that documents that every person that received one of these grants did in fact incur eligible expenses? So what most schools are doing is that they are creating an application process, if you will. Some of it is I'm inviting you to apply. Others is it is open in a way that you can choose to apply. But they're having the students essentially verify, check a box and verify that they have in fact incurred eligible expenses. Some are doing a drop-down list and listing out those housing, technology, course materials, etc., and having the student verify with an attestation that they did in fact incur those types of expenses, so that the school can say, yes, we gave it to an eligible student with eligible expenses. In terms of, do you need backup documentation? Do you need to confirm the amount? Not necessarily. There's nothing in there that says you need to do that. That is a school's own discretion. You have considerable discretion in the documents laid out in the Act, the certification, and the FAQs even, about how to determine who gets what and in what amount. So it's not to say that I tell you I incurred $117 worth of expenses and I then am entitled to $117 worth of grant funds. You can decide to base it on someone's need, whether they're full Pell, half Pell, partial Pell, whatever it might be, or some other component. So you don't necessarily need to, though there's nothing to say you can't. It's just work on the back end. But I would have some way of being able to confirm for the department, yes, we made sure that whomever got the funds did in fact incur some type of eligible expense. And then the last component I'm just going to mention here before I turn it over to Jim is outstanding balance. So although we have this 521 statement, right, that says the department issued its guidance, and its guidance is really just its current thinking and they won't truly enforce it. Well, one of the FAQs does talk about whether or not we can use some of the funds to draw down a student's outstanding balance. I would be very cautious of doing that, even under the guise that FAQs are just guidance documents, because the certification that you signed uses the word directly twice in terms of giving the funds directly to students. So I would still work under that mechanism that we all have been working under, which is just because a student has an outstanding balance doesn't mean I can take the grant funds and draw down that balance. I would also be a little mindful of giving it to students and telling them what they have to do with their funds. The idea is that you are a pass-through. You take the funds, you give it directly to the student. You can remind students that in FAQs, I've seen many FAQs that say, does this have to go to my outstanding balance? And the answer is no, this will go directly to the student, but you remain responsible for whatever your outstanding balance is. That's fine, but I would shy away from telling the student how to spend the money. It must go directly to the student unencumbered. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Jim to talk a little bit about the disbursement mechanism and the reporting requirements.
Thanks, Christina. So we've been getting a couple of questions in. There's one was simply, will the slides be made available? I think that's been answered. The answer is yes. There was a question about whether we can charge the negotiated indirect cost rates against any of these tranches. I'm going to save that. If we have time, we'll tackle that. If not, maybe we can discuss offline. I mean, I think the answer is for sure you can't charge that against the student portion because that has to go to the students. If you're getting the third tranche for HBCUs and other certain institutions, that gives you the most flexibility. So you might be able to charge it there. And I'd want to think about the institutional portion. So we can dig into that one in more detail if time allows. So Christina said, so back to the student portion, the how and the why. How do we give the money out? How do we distribute it? And then what do we have to do after we distribute it? So I'm sure these are questions you either are thinking about right now or you have been thinking about already. How should we prioritize the distribution of this money? Well, the good news is that you have discretion. I mean, the language of the certification that you all signed states, and I'll read it directly, the recipient retains discretion to determine the amount of each individual emergency financial aid grant, assuming you do so in a way that doesn't violate non-discrimination law. I mean, that's what you committed to. So you have discretion, but we definitely have guidance on how the department and the secretary are expecting you to prioritize funding. So the overall guiding principle is those most in need should get money first, and they should probably get the most money. That's the simplest way to put it. So Pell eligible students, there's clearly guidance and the suggestion that you want to get money, assuming they meet everything Christina talked about, their Title IV. Well, assuming let's stick with Title IV eligibility is something you need to have for today. It's just easier. So they're Title IV eligible and they have an eligible expense. You want to get money to your Pell eligible people first, maybe your non-Pell eligible folks who are otherwise Title IV eligible second. And, beyond that, if you have additional money, if you give it to those most in need, there is a question that's been raised. What if, and I don't know how likely this is to happen, but we've done everything the department says to do, and we sat through this webinar, and we've even tweaked our internal procedures, and we've told everyone in the community, hey, if you think you have an eligible expense, student, fill out this application, confirm you're Title IV eligible, and here's our plan, we're gonna issue X dollars, and I do think in order of priority, it should be Pell eligible, other students in significant need, and then I guess you could give money out to other Title IV eligible students who don't have great need. Nothing says you can't. We did that. We have 10,000 students, but only 5 students applied. I think that's unlikely, right? But let's say that happens. And we got $10 million to give to our students. So right now, we'd be giving $2 million to each of the 5 students who applied. That seems weird. Can I expand the group? Can we use some of that for institutional money? I don't think that's going to happen, but to the extent you find yourself with additional money, and we'll also talk about timing, so you don't have to give it all out right now. But I would say on the front end, and if as time goes on, you find that you have additional pockets of student funds that you'd like to give out, the department definitely expects you to give it out to those most in need first, and then sort of go down however you would characterize not quite as much need, and Pell eligibility is probably the easiest way for the first group. Not Pell eligible, but still significant need. Everybody else, that's probably how you should do it. And I would feel very good if someone came in to perform an audit, if that's how you prioritize the distribution of money. This question has come up both in our own work, and there was an article in the Chronicle of Higher Education on this topic. So you may have seen this, and I'm just saying it as a fact, I'm not critiquing, but Eastern Michigan University faced some criticism because they tied, or were attempting to tie, the distribution of CARES Act grant money to enrolling. So what they were proposing was, hey, listen, we've got this funding, students, and we'd love you to get some of it. So if you re-enroll for the summer, we will give you the money by giving you a credit towards your summer enrollment cost. Question, that may seem to many of you, and to some extent to me, as kind of a really clever idea. We're in a tough time. We'd like to keep our enrollment up. There is this whole point, as Christina highlighted, that the money should go to students. What better way to ensure that someone is a student than to have them enroll? And then rather than hand them the money and have them write a check to us, we'll just apply a credit. Can you do that? I think where we come out, so there's not, I can't affirmatively point you to the part in the law or any FAQ or anything that's recently been posted on the department's website that says absolutely not. Do I think that's consistent with the intention of the act? I do not, for a couple of reasons. One, which I'll get to in a second, there is some explanation of how you can disperse the money, and dispersing the money by, for example, loading money on somebody's campus credit card is not okay. So that suggests that giving someone a credit is not what the department's contemplating. They're contemplating actually issuing money to people. Two, there's guidance more on the institutional side, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes, that says you cannot use the institutional portion, and I'm paraphrasing, but to pay people to help you with enrollment. That's not a permissible use of the funds. So the department seems wary about using this money in any way to help your enrollment. It's really meant to be mostly backward looking, but to some extent current focused on expenses tied to disruption caused by coronavirus. So there might be a little more flexibility on the institutional piece, which we'll talk about, but for students, I would be really, really reluctant to tie these funds to their agreement to enroll. It's great if they do, but I wouldn't make that a condition of getting the money. How about next year? So I'll sort of tie the next 2 points together, 2021, and do we have a deadline to disperse this money? So we've gone through our process. We've come up with something that we think makes sense. We're distributing, and I'm making up numbers here entirely, $1,500 to every Pell Grant, Pell eligible student, $500 to additional students in need. And we still have some money left. And we don't really feel like we need to or want to give everything else out now. Can we give additional money out over the 2020-2021 year? And is there a deadline by which we must use all of the student money? So the answer is you need to give out, well, to the greatest extent practicable is the actual language. You need to give out all of the money within a year, right, of when you get it. So actually, I guess it's within a year of the certification. So you've got additional time to give out money. Can CARES Act funding during this summer, next year. Yeah, if a student can demonstrate that they've incurred an expense that's due to the disruption from coronavirus. I think logically, when you look at the certification and you look at the conditions for this funding, they're talking about emergency financial aid grants to address the pressing need that students have to deal with expenses that they've incurred due to coronavirus. So I certainly, I mean, and Christina will chime in if she has additional thoughts. I certainly think the intent is to give out as much money now as you can to make students not whole, but to offset their expenses on an emergency basis due to their pressing financial needs. That's the language that's used. Should you somehow find yourself with additional money to give, or you have a student who in the fall gets around to getting you their expense certification, right? And they're like, you don't have to put a hard and fast deadline on that. You probably want to, so you can give out the money in tranches, but you don't have to have a hard and fast. If you don't give us the application by, I'm making this up, June 15th, you're out of luck. You can have everyone who gives us, we're going to give out money, assuming you're eligible, in the order in which we receive applications. And we encourage you to get your application in by June 15th. But if someone doesn't get their application in until October, and you look at it and you say, yep, this seems like a legitimate expense, maybe from the spring, right? But they finally got us in their confirmation that they have a legitimate expense, and you have money left, I think you can still give it out. I don't know, Christina, if you have other.
Yeah. So I'm going to jump in on a couple of things. We've gotten a couple of questions about this. So does the student receiving the funds have to have been there in spring of 2020? That's a question we get a lot. The answer is no, they don't have to have been there in spring of 2020. And this came up, as I alluded to, this took a long time for the department to get us funds. So we were running up against the end of the semester. Students were leaving, our summer sessions were starting, and that was just the reality that we were facing. Though a student did not have to be there in spring of 2020 when March 13th hit and a national pandemic was declared. And yes, you can continue to give it to students that came in the summer and in the fall. But what you need to make sure is that that student did in fact incur eligible expenses related to the disruption of campus operations, right? So as you get further from spring of 2020, that is going to be more difficult because students are being as disrupted. Your summer programs, they probably were remote. They probably weren't intending to be remote, but then they were remote, right? So you probably still have students that are in fact incurring expenses due to the disruption of campus operations. So spring of 2020, absolutely. Summer, most likely still incurring those campus disruption expenses. As we get further away from March of 13, that might be harder. It's not to say it's an impossibility, but you are going to want to be more careful that you are in fact confirming that the recipient did in fact incur those eligible expenses. And then one other thing before we get in, I'm going to go back over to Jim, is Jim had talked a little bit about prioritization. I completely agree with him. I think the department has made it clear it's in its desire to have prioritization be based on a student's need. You do have discretion. And so that is not a hard, fast requirement, but it is certainly referenced a couple of times from the department. So it is something you want to consider. If you come up with a different prioritization scheme, that is fine. You just want to be able to defend that practice and make sure that you are explaining to the department why you chose to take that approach. So with those two thoughts in mind, I'm going to turn it back over to Jim.
Okay, thanks, Christina. And full disclosure to the participants, we're toggling back and forth on looking at your questions as the other one's speaking. So I looked at some questions while Christina was speaking. So a question came in, do we really need to get some kind of certification or confirmation that a student has incurred an expense due to disruption from coronavirus? Is Title IV eligibility not enough? So what I would say is in your certification, you are certifying, and we'll talk about on the slide actually, the False Claims Act. You're certifying that you're giving money out to students who are eligible, who have incurred an expense due to disruption from the coronavirus. And while, you know, knock on wood, this won't happen for any of you, the department can come in and perform an audit. I would feel much more comfortable, were I you, if I had some application or confirmation from the student that, yes, I incurred an expense due to disruption from coronavirus. I just think you're in a much better position. You don't need, and in fact, I would discourage you from asking people to fill out a 20-page questionnaire and attach receipts. And I don't think you need to do all of that. But if the department were to come in and say, how did you determine X college that these students actually incurred an eligible expense? I would not be comfortable saying, well, we just sort of assumed they did. I'd want to say we asked them to affirmatively represent that they did. And I'd even, and we certainly can talk about and provide, you know, offline possible ways to do this. I'd have them fill out a little form where they check a box. I had a housing disruption. I had a technology disruption. I got all my meals at school and now I can't anymore. So I had to buy my food. I used childcare at the college because you guys provided free childcare. Now I had to pay for childcare. I'd have them just check the box and then I would feel very good that you've honored what the certification requires you to do, that you've not in any way even close made a false certification, and that if you were audited on the back end, you would have documentation that everybody who got $1, they told us, they represented to us, they had an eligible expense. So I think next on the list, to try to get through the next couple ones, I think we can do that pretty quickly on the left-hand side of the slide. Then I want to talk about the right-hand side and then get on to the institutional portion. Delivery method, how do we give this money out? The literal nuts and bolts. To the extent we can still rely on the FAQs, so we'll rely on it for this purpose. It says you can give out the money checks, ETF, debit cards, you can use it an appropriate payment application. But as I sort of alluded to, the one thing, well, there are two things you can't do. You can't encumber the payment, meaning if the student you're going to give a grant to, so let's say it's a $1,500 grant and they owe you $300, you can't deduct the $300 and give them $1,200. You have to give them the full $1,500. If that's what you determine, you're giving all students in a certain category. And you cannot put the payment on a campus credit card that would, you know, allow them to buy $1,500 worth of food or stuff at your bookstore next year, which is why I think tying it to enrollment. Another reason I think that's problematic. Do the cash management rules that you use for Title IV funding apply? I'll just say very briefly, who knows? But the short answer is, although we talk about Title IV a lot, these actually are not Title IV funds, which it's hard to remember that sometimes, but this is not Title IV funding. This is a separate congressional bucket of funding. If you want to adhere to the cash management rules, if you want to treat this money like you would treat it Title IV money, you know, maybe that makes some sense for you, but this is not actually, even though it seems and feels like Title IV money in a bunch of ways, this is not Title IV money. What are our reporting? So, okay, we've got the money. I sort of understand now how to distribute it. I know the certification said something like I need to report to the Secretary of Education how I'm spending the money. What does that mean? Well, for the student side, which is what we're talking about here, I could say we know for sure one thing you have to do. We know pretty much for sure another thing you have to do, and there's some ambiguity around the rest. So what do I know for sure sitting here today you have to do? Based on guidance that was issued on May 6th, you must, within 30 days of when you get the money, and there's a distinction of when you get the money, put on your website in an accessible format information as follows. And if, Christina gave you the link to it, but I'll just run through them very quickly. An acknowledgement that, yep, we signed the certification about these student funds. Here's the total amount of money we've received. Here's the total amount of money we've given out, emergency grants to students that we've given out so far. Here are the total number of students at our institution who are Title IV eligible under Section 484. Here are the total number of students who've gotten grants. And here are the instructions and guidance that we've given to our students about these funds. So to boil it down, it's basically of how many eligible people have you given money to, make sure students know, hey, there's this money there and you can go get it, right? And if there was, I assume the department it would be notable if you said we have 25,000 eligible students and we've given out 2 grants. That's probably going to jump out, right? So that we know you need to do online within 30 days of getting the money. The certification itself, this was not in the certification itself. The certification itself says within 30 days of when you submitted the certification, you need to report certain things to the Secretary of Education herself. It's a different obligation. I say we think we know for sure that's still applicable because in the May 6th guidance, the department said, we realize we haven't told you exactly how to submit that other report to the secretary, including literally where to send it. So more to come, but they haven't provided us with any more detail and it's 16 days later. So I think we believe the conservative approach is, in addition to this public posting, within 30 days of when you sign the certification for the student funds, you should honor the obligation, which is in paragraph 4B of that certification, and send a report to the secretary explaining what you have to explain, how the grants were distributed, the amount of each grant, how you calculated the grants, and instructions you gave to the student. So that's separate apart from the public posting. Where do you send it? That's a fair question. Literally, do I just stick it in the mail to Betsy DeVos? That's where we're supposed to be getting further guidance that we don't have. Right now, I would say, yeah, I would literally send a hard copy of the certification required, the report required in your certification, addressed to Betsy DeVos. And then I would also send it to, there's an email address, HEERF@ed.gov, that appears in a lot of these documents. I'd send it there as well. I would want to be boots and suspenders and say we've honored every reporting obligation. Related point, okay, what is, and Christina and I are hearing this a lot, what is that reporting obligation? Because when I read the certification, it says we must report how we distributed grants to students and the amount and so forth. And then it also says we must document that we have continued to pay all of our employees and contractors during the period of any disruptions or closures to the greatest extent practicable, explaining in detail all specific actions and decisions related thereto. And you would say, hey, Jim, I noticed that's a different verb. So it says I have to report the grant piece, but I have to document the fact that I've continued to pay my employees to the greatest extent practicable. So does that also need to go in the report? Or do I just need to document it and keep it in a file in case I'm audited? Christina and I have gone back and forth a lot on this. I think where we land is the literal reading is that you need to document that you're paying your employees to the greatest extent practicable and keep a good record of that, and any decisions you've made around furloughing or layoffs and why I don't think you need to submit that in a report to the secretary. Having said that, if you have a good story to tell, which I know is true for some of you, like we haven't laid off anybody and we haven't had to do any furloughs, I don't see a lot of downside to sharing that good news with the Department of Education, but I don't think you have to. The related question, and I promise you this is the most time I'm going to spend on any one slide, but there's a lot to digest here. The related question is, well, what does it mean, folks, when it says we have to continue to pay people to the greatest extent practicable? That sounds very lawyerly. I don't know what that means. What does that mean? Well, there's no additional guidance as we sit here today. So the only reasonable way we think to interpret that is to the greatest extent practicable given the financial situation at your institution. It just has to be a subjective standard. It can't be that the Secretary of Education parachutes in and says, I think you could have paid, I don't think you had to do these furloughs, or I think your layoffs were outrageous. I think, which is important to document what you're doing and why and how it ties into your financial picture. If you determine it is not practicable to maintain all of your employees for the summer and you have furloughs, just document that, and I think you're okay. Finally, in the certification about the student funds, it very scarily at the very end says that if you fail to comply with this agreement, you could have liability under, among other things, the False Claims Act. And that appropriately makes people nervous because the False Claims Act sounds scary and it has civil and criminal penalties. Oh my gosh, there's a lot of gray here, but you're telling me if I get it wrong, we could be subject to the False Claims Act. I wish I never took this job, right? Like that's a fair way to feel. The False Claims Act, just to be clear, because it is scary, but the False Claims Act only applies if there's an intentional and knowing misrepresentation. So if you subjectively interpret practicability different from the government, or you legitimately believe a student has eligible expenses and the department says, yeah, I don't see it that way, X college. Okay, I mean, they can say that, but you're not going to be hammered under the False Claims Act unless you're representing to the department in these reports, you know, we gave out money to 300 students and instead you deposited all that money in your own bank account, right? Nobody's going to do that. So as long as you're not intentionally making misrepresentations, you're going to be okay. All right. Next slide, please. And I'm going to turn it over to Christina, I think.
That is fine. Okay, so institutional portion. We spent a long time today on the student portion, and I think
Nope, Christina, I'm sorry. I was misreading. You're right. I was misreading my notes. This is still me.
if you want to take it, that's fine. I'll jump in with any additional thoughts. So
Nope. I just had my notes. Remote webinars. No, I got it. So the institutional portion mentioned, there's the student portion we've talked about ad nauseum, although I think that's really, really important. The institutional portion derives from the same sections of the CARES Act. The same documents Christina referenced earlier are the same documents you should look at for further guidance. And this allows the institution to use half of the money, 50%, to cover costs that you've incurred associated with significant changes to the delivery of instruction due to coronavirus. So next slide, please. So let's, just like the student piece, let's break that down into two parts: the expense eligibility and the reporting requirements for the institutional portion of the CARES Act money. Next slide, please. So what expenses are eligible for your use under the institutional portion of the CARES Act money? It has to be a cost associated with significant changes to the delivery of instruction due to the coronavirus. So that's where I would circle back briefly to the question about negotiated indirect cost rates, or those associated to the significant change to the delivery of instruction due to the coronavirus? I'll be totally honest, I would need to think about that in a more thoughtful way. But if you can make the argument, I mean, maybe. But that's the touchstone. So it's not every expense. It's not, to be crystal clear, because this comes up a lot and with good reason, you know, our enrollment looks to be down. Can we use this money to offset anticipated revenue loss? It's got to be tied to changes to delivery of instruction. Already touched on this briefly, but if you've already given refunds to students on or after March 13th, 2020 for disruption that they've had, so you went ahead and did that on your own, you can reimburse yourself, and you can use your institutional money, and actually you're encouraged to, you don't have to, but you're encouraged to use some of your own institutional money to give additional grants to students. What you can't do, unequivocally, you can't use the institutional money to pay contractors for pre-enrollment recruitment activities, including marketing and advertising. You can't use it to cover your costs associated with your endowments. You can't use this money for capital outlays related to athletics, sectarian instruction, or religious worship. And you cannot use it to pay senior administrators or executive salaries, benefits, bonuses, stock buybacks, things like that. Next slide, please. So what that last slide will leave you with, and I know folks have asked this question, I think we'll touch on this again later, is, okay, well, you said I can't use the money to pay salaries for executives or administrators. What about employees or faculty? So what I would do for that, to answer that question, which has come up a number of times, is I put two things together. Is my payment of that employee or faculty member due to a disruption from coronavirus? And are we sure that person's not an executive or an administrator? If the answer to both of those things is yes, then yeah, I think you can use the institutional portion to recoup expenses for your employees or faculty, but it would have to be something like, we've moved online due to disruptions of coronavirus, and we've had to hire additional faculty who can teach online because the people we had before weren't capable of doing that for whatever reason. I think that would be justifiable. Or, and this is a big one that comes up a lot, we have had to meaningfully expand our online learning, which frankly the department wants you to do. It's right in the certification document, and it's in the April 30th letter from Betsy DeVos. We've had to build out our online learning, which is great, but we've now had to hire 10 new IT people. Can't manage it otherwise. Are those expenses the types of expenses you can use your institutional CARES Act money to either reimburse yourself or offset? Yeah, I think you can. I think that's exactly what it's meant to be used for. But what you can't do is, well, we're now online in the summer, and these 5 faculty are going to teach these 5 courses. It's the same 5 faculty teaching the same 5 courses just online, and you haven't incurred any new or additional expense. You can't use the money for that. I see we're getting a lot of questions, and Christina's unmuted, which probably means we want to tackle a couple.
Yes, sorry. When we switched slides, I went unmuted, but I figured I'd be jumping in. Yeah, but let's tackle a couple of the questions, because I think we did get a number of them here. I think Jim did a good job on the staff related questions. And I agree with him. Look, increasing your IT staff, absolutely. Another thing is training, right? You probably have to train some of your employees that are not very facile with teaching online or teaching in a remote environment. Depending on what your environment might look like, right? You can have a synchronized or an asynchronized, and that might be different, and you might need to train the faculty member to be able to deal with that. And so those are the types of expenses that I think would fall right within how the department is viewing this. I want to be mindful, of course, right, if you're dealing with any remote or online platforms, right, much like everything else, right? If you had a contract for a remote platform and you had it prior to March 13th, and you now will probably be continuing it because of the remote environment that we're in now, is that, really ask yourself, is that something that has changed? If it was something you were planning to do beforehand, is it really a change in the delivery of instruction? Now, if you modify that contract or if you take on additional capacity to account for the additional users, then I would say yes. Some of the questions, of course, you want to be mindful, right, that that isn't a bundled contract that has some pre-enrollment activities that are excluded, of course. But apart from that, I would say yes. One of the questions is, well, what happens if we didn't have an online platform? We enter into some agreement, but it's a 3-year contract. It's a question that we get a lot. What I think the answer is, if you were paying it over 3 years, then probably not, because you would not be, to the greatest extent practicable, paying it within that 1 year that is listed in your certification. But if it is an upfront cost, then I think that is an area that, if it's a new cost, it's due to the change in delivery of instruction and you're paying it now. I think that that's something that you could defend to the secretary if you were to use your institutional funds for that. One of the questions we're getting about is delivery of instruction. And right, what does instruction mean? Are we just talking about the classroom? Again, this is, as many things we see with the department, right? We don't have something that I can point you to say, here is how instruction is defined. But I think that there is a case to be made that the educational experience is more than just a classroom learning. And so if there are particular services that you need to put up in a remote way, telehealth is one we're seeing, or otherwise something that you need to create some online or remote capacity so that you are able to support your students, and not just telehealth, right? You might have academic counseling services that you provide, but you still need to get an IT platform for those people to be able to continue those services. I think that that is something that you could probably defend as a change in the delivery of instruction. So those are just a few of the questions that I think are popping up now. We can certainly, we have a Q&A coming up. So what I will do now is just move to some of the reporting requirements, and we'll tackle some of the additional questions as we get towards the back end. I just want everyone to be mindful about the reporting requirements that are actually located in your certification. I think I'm not going to rehash the False Claims Act that Jim just went over, and frankly, I won't even go back through the greatest extent practicable, because I think that he's addressed that as well. But what I want schools to be mindful about is take a look back at your certifications and just make sure that you actually know all the provisions that you are agreeing to comply with. Particularly, it's going to be in paragraph 4 for most of them, right beyond E straight through to the end. And it will go through a list of requirements that you're going to need. One I want to make you aware of, because it's maybe not an OMB requirement that you might already be familiar with due to other obligations, but it's this first requirement. It's actually another provision of the CARES Act. Division B is actually reporting on use of funds. So what this says, and because this is not something that you might have noted in another provision, is no later than 10 days after the end of each calendar year, you will need to make a report to the awarding agency that basically goes through the total amount of funds received, the disbursement, and a detailed list of how the funds were used, much like you're already doing or will be doing with the secretary. But I would probably put sort of a calendar reminder. We'll probably get more information about how exactly that has to be submitted, but at least note the date. The rest of the reporting requirements in the certification, they're either listed out, the additional future reporting requirements, that's in 4E. And then the CFR is really just document maintenance. So you want to make sure that you're retaining the documents appropriately, and that should the government ask to see them, that you have the data available to show them. And then in terms of the Federal Claims Act and the other things that Jim went over, they are all listed in the certification as well. So with that, if we can move forward one slide, Got about 45 minutes left. So what I want to leave is time for at the end for some Q&A, but I do want to go over this tranche 3, and then we'll dive into some more of the questions. So as I said, tranche 3 is not, and that's sort of what we're calling it, tranche 1, 2, and 3, right? Tranche 3 is not necessarily for everyone on this call, but there are a number of you that are receiving these funds. This is based on a separate provision in the Act itself, and that's where we get the language about how you can use these funds. So again, the key documents are listed on that same website. There is no FAQ associated with these funds, so we don't necessarily have to think or worry about the 521 statement that just went up last night. Of course, there is a cover letter though, so read that, but of course read it with the idea that what really stands is what the Act says itself and what your certification says. In this case, what the use of these funds are is what I've listed in the purpose here. It may be used to defray expenses, all right? And these are the types of expenses that are specifically listed. This one does say lost revenue, reimbursement for expenses already incurred, technology costs associated with a transition to distance education, faculty and staff trainings, and payroll. You can also use this as grants to students for any components of a student's cost of attendance. I would be mindful that if I were to use the third tranche to give it directly to students, that I would stay in compliance with how I'm giving my other student aid portions. Though they've never made that, since the 521 statement, they haven't made that direct link. I would be very careful and cautious and make sure that the way I'm giving it directly to a student is always under the same guidelines. In terms of the defray expenses, right? So the question is, do I get a little bit more flexibility here? I think you could probably make an argument for many of these expenses. Well, I could probably find a way, if I define the expense in a certain way, that it's tied to a significant change in the delivery of instruction. And that might be the case. So you might find that there is an overlay between how you can use funds for tranche 2 and from tranche 3. That said, we do have things that are specifically listed and delineated in the Act itself for these provisions, such as lost revenue, that we don't have listed in the institutional funds. It's not to say you couldn't make the argument, but I do think you're probably going to get a little bit more leeway and can probably get a little bit more creative about how you use these funds. It's not to say that the department has said, have at it, use them however you want, but they are a bit more broad in terms of just using it to defray expenses to, I think the words are basically prevent and prepare to address the needs related to the coronavirus. And so I think you have a little bit more flexibility there, but you might find that there is some overlap between the institutional funds and the minority funds. So if we could go one more slide. So let's go another one. We've kind of gone over this. I did it with the first slide. So these are really the ones that are listed out. And so I would try to the best as you can to lead or to use the funds in the third tranche into one of these categories. This is how it's laid out in the Act itself in terms of these defrayed expenses. With the student grants, my only caveat is, again, use it the same way as the student portion funds. If we go over to the next slide, the reporting requirements are pretty much the exact same. Again, you're going to have that same reporting on the use of funds under the CARES Act. That deadline is going to be the exact same for all uses of the funds, which is 10 days after, no later than 10 days after the end of each calendar year. And this one does have that same potential for additional reporting in the future. And so you want to make sure you're looking at particularly paragraph 4. That seems to be where all of your reporting requirements and certifications are in each of the certificates for each of the 3 tranches. So that's just a quick overview of the third tranche. I think at this point, and correct me if I'm wrong, if we move one more slide, we're going to move into the Q&A session. So I'll open it up to Jim, who might have been tracking some of the questions that have been coming in, and then I will jump in with some more. Some of you were kind enough to send them to us in advance. So I think we'll have go over some of the ones that are coming in now and go over some of the ones that came in, I think, as of yesterday.
Okay, great, Christina. So I'll tackle a couple, and then I'd also encourage Lauren and Bill, if there's things we're missing that we should be covering, let us know. So I'm just going to try to tack down the list. If courses are offered again in the fall, but to enforce social distancing, we decrease the class size and have to pay additional faculty to teach additional sections because due to coronavirus, we're now going to have more classrooms, and so we need more faculty. Would that be an eligible, I assume, institutional expense? That's clearly not an eligible student expense. You know, I would say yes. I mean, you know, what I'd want to make sure, and I know this is not the suggestion, that I would not use this as an opportunity to create smaller classes, which you've been wanting to do for years anyway. And now, aha, we've got our pile of money to do that. But if you legitimately can, and this is why documentation is so important, show, hey, listen, here's the CDC guidance or the state of Florida guidance or the governor's directive about social distancing. We're going to honor that on our campus. And to do that, we need to have more classes, but smaller classes, which means we need more faculty. I mean, the literal language, which I have in front of me, is that you must have a reasoned basis for concluding that these costs have a clear nexus to significant changes to the delivery of instruction due to coronavirus. I would say that checks all the boxes. This is a change to the delivery of instruction due to coronavirus, and the cost you incur has a clear nexus to it. So again, I'd make sure that's really why you're doing it, but if it is, you know, I think that's okay. And related question, and then Christina, I'll kick maybe some over to you. Would providing faculty with laptops so that they can deliver remote instruction either that we're having this summer or in the fall, would that be a qualified expense? I think that one's pretty easy. I would say, yeah. I mean, that is a cost that you're incurring because you've had to change your delivery of instruction due to the coronavirus. There's a question about the state's obligation to maintain effort under section 18008. So this talks about if a state applies for funds, it must maintain support for elementary and secondary and higher education within the state. I may exercise my prerogative to tackle that one separately. I'm sure there's someone on who's with the state, and that's why they're asking that question. But I don't know if that will apply to everybody, so I'm happy to tackle that one separately. And then there's a question about PPE, and Christina, I don't know, I know we got that in advance. Maybe you want to tackle that one?
Yep. So we've got a lot of questions about, when we're talking about the delivery of instruction changing, are we really just talking about converting from face-to-face to online? Or can we use some of these funds to address basically the return to campus, coming back face-to-face, but our instruction will look quite different. And in ways we're going to need additional PPE and other things basically to comply with CDC guidelines. And I think ultimately, you know, you want to be careful that you're really talking about things, as Jim said, not, oh, we've always wanted to do this and now we have the opportunity to do this. And more, we're doing this because we're returning to campus, and this is what the CDC says that we need to do in order to safely return to campus, you know, absent a vaccine. Then I think you can make the argument that that would be tied to the delivery of instruction. So I think that that could be a useful way to use the institutional funds. Of course, that wouldn't be student funds, but institutional funds and maybe those third funds, so long as it truly, and you can defend that it's tied to the change in the delivery of instruction. And so we got a number of questions about PPE. So I'll I'll kind of put that broadly, right? So we've gotten questions about PPE, meaning facial coverings, plexiglass, things like that. First and foremost, you want to make sure that it is something new and not something you wanted to do. And then secondly, you want to make sure if you are doing this, that you are in fact using this under the institutional funds or under your third tranche. I will say that, I had a question in other ways about what happens if we don't use all of our student funds. What do we do with that money, and are we limited to using the institutional funds in the same way? My response to that would be, you should use all of your student funds, right? You should find a way to make sure that you are getting all of those student funds out. There's nothing to say technically that you have to match it dollar for dollar. We got a question about, do you need to draw it down from G5 dollar for dollar? There's nothing that says that you need to do that. But ultimately, you need to use at least 50% of your allotted amount for your students. And so you really want to max out that advanced funds portion, that first tranche that we're talking about. All right, so I'm going to switch it back over to Jim for a second, and I'll take a look down the list at what's left.
Okay, so there were at least two more that I think we can, maybe actually a bunch more came in. So I'll tackle two more. So one is, if we've, in the current environment, suffered a cut from state appropriations or otherwise that's forced us to cut a program or services, can we use this money to bring those services back? I don't know. I mean, I don't think, for the institutional portion anyway, I don't think that's an expense you've been forced to incur due to a change in the delivery of instruction from coronavirus. I mean, like, incidentally, it is. I guess you could make that argument, but I don't, and Christina may have other thoughts. I mean, I would be reluctant to, if a program gets cut because of state funding, to use CARES Act money to bring it back, because that's close to using the money to replace revenue, which, so I guess I should say, if you're getting some money in that third tranche, which Christina talked about, you do have some more flexibility there, and it does specifically talk about lost revenue. So if you're getting that money, I'd feel a little more comfortable about that, but I really think these funds are intended to cover expenses to maintain ongoing programming, not to bring back something that's gone. But I don't know, Christina, if you have different thoughts on that one.
No, I agree with that one. I think that would be a
Okay.
harder one to defend.
All right. And then the other one, and there are a bunch, but the other one that came up is, I think we've covered the Senate table. They keep, which is great. They keep coming in, but I lost my question. Can we use the funds for staff who aren't in the classroom? So I think this is a really good question. So let's assume you've had to hire not additional faculty, but we've had to hire additional people, I don't know, to administer these funds, or we've had to hire, as I mentioned, IT people, or more or different security people, or more cleaning staff, because we need to have daily deep cleaning that we didn't used to have to do. Can we use the, I assume the question is the institutional portion for that. So are those costs that you've incurred due to a change in the method of instruction from coronavirus? And I appreciate the question, because the thought is, well, that's not really instruction, it's other stuff around campus. So my own view on that one, and again, Christina may have other thoughts, is I think you can. I think if you've been forced to make changes to how you're delivering instruction that isn't just limited to the number of teachers or the classroom or the format. If to effectively teach in this environment, you need to have more IT people or you need to have more cleaning people, and that's the only way that we can safely deliver instruction due to coronavirus. If I were your lawyer, I'd feel comfortable defending that. I don't know, Christina, what you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think I draw the distinction between, you know, if there were, so if we had staff that were there, and we paid them, though we really didn't have much for them to do because we were in a remote environment, can we use this money to pay them? I draw the line there because I don't think it's a payment you would have already had to make. But I think if you are bringing in some employee, and not just a professor, but some employee that is a necessary component due to the change in the delivery of instruction, as we can broadly think of it, sure. I mean, I could get behind that. I mean, I think everything's a little fact specific, but I think generally as a principle, it's an area that I would, you know, you could definitely explore with these funds. All right. So a couple of random, kind of random, meaning that they are not necessarily tied together, but I'm looking at some of the advanced questions that came in. Can we reimburse ourselves for virtual commencement expenses? So, and Jim may have different thoughts on this one. While I think you could make an argument, right, that it was due to the change in the delivery of instruction being a broad way of thinking about the educational experience, I don't know that that's necessarily the intent and spirit of what the funds were intended to be used for. So I think that would be a bit more of a stretch for that one. Similarly, you know, we've been asked questions about reimbursement for certain types of services. So legal services, crisis communication services. Again, while I think you could probably make an argument that but for the coronavirus and how we're changing the delivery of our instruction, we wouldn't have had to engage those professional services because we needed to understand how and what to do in response. Again, I don't think that that's necessarily the intent for those funds. And so I think that one also would be a bit of a stretch and would be more difficult to explain to the department. All right, so I don't know if Jim, if you have one in the ready, otherwise I'll go down.
Yeah, there are a couple more that have come in, which is great. So great question. So, and I'm paraphrasing, Harvard, Princeton, and some others have turned down their funds. You know, good for them. Or is that money going to be reallocated and sent out to the rest of us? I have no idea. I honestly tend to doubt it, but I don't, right now, I just don't know where the departments, it's fascinating to me. I realize this isn't necessarily your question, but it's fascinating that the department, and you've all seen it, they very specifically delineated how much money every institution was going to get, student portion, institutional portion. And it's not like Harvard or Princeton said, we want X, right? The department made those calculations. They put it in a spreadsheet and they sent them the money. And then Harvard and Princeton and others have been criticized for getting the money the Congress said they should get. And it was Congress's idea. It wasn't Harvard's idea or Princeton's idea. So I just find the whole, the notion that they did something wrong by accepting the money to be a little bit absurd, frankly, because again, Congress is the one that decided it. But having said that, is that money going to go out to other people? I just don't know. Another question that came in that I think is a really good question is okay, so gotcha on if there's PPE or safety equipment that relates to classrooms or students, or literally the delivery of instruction to students, could make a good argument that that's related to a change in the delivery of instruction. What about our non-student facing offices, like the finance office? Can we put up plexiglass, or we have PPE? Is that an expense where we can use the CARES Act funding to cover that expense? I don't know. I mean, I struggle. And look, I mean, we should say we're all figuring this out as we go, right? Because there's no case law. There are no hypotheticals that have been provided. But I can get more comfortable with things around IT and security and cleaning, to the extent that's all going to tie into the classroom. Making yourself safe in your finance office, which is really important, by the way. Does that have a reason basis? Is there a reason basis to conclude that that has a clear nexus to a significant change in the delivery of instruction? I don't know. I think that's a little more attenuated. I mean, I guess you could make the argument we can't have students unless they pay money, and we need a finance office to have them pay money. And if the people in the finance office aren't safe, we won't have students. So, you know, in some literal causal way, it's tied to a change in the delivery of instruction. I think that's honestly a bit of a stretch. Now, that third tranche of money, and I'm going to keep coming back to that, you have a lot more flexibility if you fall in that category.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with Jim on that. While I understand the desire to keep the entire community and campus as safe as possible, and that's certainly what we should all be attending to do, we do need to be careful about the use of the funds. And while I think there is a bit of an ability to expand the concept of instruction outside of the classroom, I do think, and there's nothing that says this exactly, but it's just sort of my take, is that when we talk about instruction, we should be trying to connect it to our students' use of our campus, right? How are we communicating vis-a-vis our students? And that's probably a good way of thinking about instruction. Again, it can be outside the classroom, but I think we want to think about it more tied to the delivery of the education to the student. And again, that's sort of my take on it. We don't have anything defining instruction. One of the questions that we did get, and it's a good one, and I want to make sure that everyone leaves with a clear sort of understanding of at least our understanding. So the concept that salaries, right? We've talked a little bit about salaries, and the concept that payroll is specifically listed in tranche 3. And payroll is not specifically listed in tranche 2. And the question of, can you really use some of tranche 2 for payroll? And I think the answer is possibly. You just need to make sure that you tie it to a significant change in the delivery of instruction. Why are you choosing to pay this person, right? You also, of course, need to be careful that the salary you're paying for either tranche doesn't fall into that restricted batch, right? So those senior executives that are listed out, you cannot pay their salaries with any of the tranches. In terms of tranche 2, what you just want to be really careful about if you're going to use the money is there really something that has changed? Am I employing this person anew because I'm removing to a remote environment? Am I bringing on more IT people because I need to have the capacity to support a much larger remote environment? Have I completely, have I had to arguably increase someone's salary because they've literally taken on a new position that we had to create because we're changing the delivery of instruction? Something to that effect. I would be very careful about using particularly tranche 2 for any salary that you would have otherwise had to pay. And I think that's where you really want to make sure you draw the line. Of course, with the caveat that we keep reminding you about is that there are certain salaries you can't pay with either of these tranches. So I hope that clarified that question. All right, Jim.
We had a question which was inadvertently marked as answered, which wasn't answered. So there was a question about DSO runs our student dorms, and I just wanted to confirm by DSO we meant direct support organization, which Bill kindly confirmed is what it meant. Refunds were given to students due to the disruption caused by coronavirus. So in other words, the separate 501c3 actually runs the dorm. I assume embedded in the question is they gave the refund, not the institution. Can we use CARES Act money to make the DSO whole? I don't think so. I just don't see a way. The question, and I'd like to say yes. I don't see how you can get there, or at least I want to. Whoever that questioner is, I'd love to talk through with you thinking around that before you did that.
Yep, and I'm in line with Jim's thought on that. So my gut reaction is no. If there are specifics that might be useful to the equation, happy to chat, but my gut reaction is no as well. Okay.
Then there was a question, and Christina, you may pick up on more. So sort of circling back, which I understand, and it would be a big issue for me too, salaries. So someone has appropriately noted that the third tranche specifically mentions salaries. The second tranche doesn't specifically mention salaries one way or the other. Are we sure that we can use the institutional portion, the second tranche, to cover salaries? So I would say, to be totally transparent, I'm not sure of anything right now, given some of the changes we saw last night, but there's nothing about the institutional portion or the certification or the FAQ that says you can't use that money for salaries. And what it talks about, again, is an expense that has a significant relationship to disruption from coronavirus, and you have a reasoned basis to say there's a nexus. So if we're talking about, again, salaries for additional people that you need to hire to effectively deliver the instruction due to coronavirus, and there's people that you didn't have to hire before, I would feel pretty good that, yeah, that should be an expense that you can use your CARES Act, your institutional CARES Act funding for. With the exception of, as we mentioned, payments to executives and administrators and bonuses.
Okay, so we have an outstanding question about simulator software, specifically for health or science classes. This is one of those, I will answer broadly, but as phrased to whomever posted it, I'd be happy to talk specifics, because one of the things it says is, this is a long-term perspective of what the college would already like to do. But it's arguably meeting an intent to expand online capability. And so while I think any effort to expand remote platforms is most likely a good use of your second tranche of funds, particularly if you reference, though we know it's just a guidance document, but if you reference the secretary's letter, she quote unquote encourages you to use the funds to expand your remote platforms. And so arguably a simulator to work with your health sciences could go to that effort. I'd be interested to see, if this is truly a change in the delivery of instruction. Are we truly changing will that simulator change how we deliver instruction to our students in that particular class or classes? And if so, are we doing that in an effort to expand our remote learning environment in response to the pandemic that we're in? So I think the answer is fact specific, perhaps, just given the three questions that are posed together. I think those are the types of things you might be able to get behind. You would just want to be very careful that you could say that this is not just, wow, something we've always wanted to do, but is in fact something that we need to do because we are looking to expand our remote platform due to the significant change in the delivery of our instruction. So if the speaker wants to talk specifics offline, I am happy to do so, but with the information we have, that's the sort of the broad reaction to the question.
Hey, Christina or Jim, a couple of questions. One of them that came in late in office was, how do you suggest documenting revenue loss? How do you, are there any special criteria to it or methods that would be expected to be able to document how the loss of revenue is defined?
Yes, so I don't know. Well, here's what I can tell you, and happy to provide this information again offline in detail. But we have like 12-page memo on. So if you look at attachment A to each certification, it talks about all of the cost principles, audit requirements, budget principles, record retention requirements, documentation requirements that you should have. And it goes through, I don't know, 18 different CFR provisions. So that's the literal answer, is I'd want to make sure you're complying with all of the CFR provisions and the OMB provisions that are referenced in that attachment A to your certifications. The short answer is, but literally, how do we calculate it, and what form should that live in? I don't know, honestly, without knowing your specific circumstance, but I'd want to obviously work with, you are the finance folks for the most part, so I'd want to talk to you, potentially think about engaging an expert. There are people who are good. They're also looking for work, to be honest, but I know there are folks at Deloitte and other shops that are helping in this area. Maybe you confer with them and come up with an explanation of your revenue loss that you feel really good about, and then you maintain the documents the way you have to according to your certification.
Thank you. One other one, if you could address the concept of waiving a future fee, say in the fall and the spring, waiving a distance learning fee, and then asking for reimbursement. So the student gets the reduced amount, the school retains the exact same amount of money it would have received in its place. And particularly probably on the distance learning fee, because as you move more and more people towards online, we're wanting them to go in that direction based on the circumstances. Is there a possibility to be able to put a fee waiver replacement into place?
I don't know, Christine, if you want to.
Yeah.
But I want to go back and forth, I think.
Right. So I think on tranche 3, I think I could get there comfortably in terms of lost revenue. In tranche 2, the only guiding principle we have is tied to a significant change in the delivery of instruction, and this technically is, we're just waiving something we would otherwise charge them. I don't know that it's a precise fit for tranche 2. I'd want to think about it a little bit more. I don't know if Jim has immediate thoughts or has thought more on that particular question.
Yeah, I have only thought more about that because a community college in a state other than Florida has asked virtually that identical question. And, where without sharing specific legal advice, I would just say the flavor of the discussion was, I think that's aggressive, but if you literally have had to change your method of instruction from in-person to online for this particular course or all of your courses. And that has an additional expense. There's a fee associated with that. And to encourage students to participate, you're going to waive that fee, which means you're not recovering that expense. And combining that with, and I'm going to get the exact language because I actually feel like it's important. So in Betsy DeVos's April 30th, 2020 letter about these funds, she specifically says on page 2, I encourage you to use these awards to expand your remote learning programs and build your IT capacity. Now, we've been told we shouldn't rely on anything in these letters and the guidance, but it is in there, and she is the Secretary of Education. So could I, in a long way, could I get there and say, well, we're doing what Betsy DeVos asked us to do, and this is a legitimate expense that we didn't have before? I think that was the flavor of the discussion. I would just say that.
Thank you.
Okay. And just so Jim referenced the April 30th letter, and that language is in there. That relates to the third tranche. That same language is in the April 21st letter. So when you're thinking through that on your particular campus, the April 21st letter relates to the second tranche, April 30th relates to the third. So that language is in both. I think I share Jim's hesitation, but at the same time, I acknowledge and recognize that language is there for both of them. So you could make the argument, I think, but it would be a harder one. All right. Let's see, what do we still have left? One of the questions is, say we use these funds to purchase laptops or webcams for our students. Do they have to be added to the 1098T? You know, I don't purport to be an expert in this area. I think the answer is yes, though. I think that would probably be listed. I think it's box 5. I don't know that it would be box 1, given what the IRS has said about how students can treat these. But I think that would be the answer. Again, I don't purport to be an expert in it, but I think that you would list that. All right, one of the other things is, what about using a firm to test proctor, right? So remotely proctoring tests, because we are in a remote environment. Could we do that? I think if you can make the argument that, right, we are in a remote environment, we still need to give tests and we still need to somehow have them proctored under some form of sort of our honor code. I think you can make the argument that that is related to the change in the delivery of instruction. I think the question said they hadn't purchased it in the past, right? If you already had this and you just are going to continue using this now because you have more classes in an online environment, I don't know that that would be related to a change in your delivery of instruction. But if you hadn't before, then you might be able to do that. Again, anytime though you're doing anything with contractors, right? Any agreement that you're signing with an outside person, if you're going to use these funds for it, you really want to make sure you look at those to make sure that there is no bundling involved, no pre-enrollment activities, marketing activities, etc., all of which would be precluded as ineligible expenses. So anytime you do something with a contractor, you want to be really careful about what that says and whether or not there are some excluded provisions within there. So Jim, I don't know if you have any others teed up. I'm just sort of running down the list.
No, well, it's more of a thought, and I think it's a good thought, and I should have mentioned it, and I was starting to type a response, but I'll just read it out loud because I thought it was a good observation. So someone said, having listened to my mental gymnastics to justify that distance learning fee, said, you know, wouldn't it be cleaner just to charge the costs which supported the need of the fee directly to the grant instead of making it a revenue type issue? And the answer is yes. Yeah,
that's different, right?
It would be much easier for me to give you an explanation for that than the way I tried to justify it the other way. that's a very good thought.
Okay. All right, we probably have time for maybe one more question and then maybe some closing comments from Jim and Christina.
I'm trying to see. All right, so this one I will get to because it's probably something a lot of schools have already set their way of dealing with the student funds in motion. But of course, we had up until May 21st at 7 p.m., right? We had the thought that we absolutely needed the student to be Title IV eligible, right? And then the question is, well, when do I freeze time, right? Is it eligibility as of today when I decide to do it this way? Is it eligibility as of the moment I make disbursement, right? For our Title IV folks on the phone, we get it, right? So when you are dispersing it, that's really when you're dealing with someone's Title IV eligibility. You know, for this one, if you are going down the instructions that we all had, you know, as of this time yesterday, which is you want Title IV eligibility, you want to confirm through a FAFSA. I think it is generally acceptable. You know, there's a practicality issue here that you need to pick a point in time and make that determination. You know, it's not an exact science. It's not the cleanest way. Of course, the cleanest way would be at the moment of disbursement. That's a lot on the back end. If you are picking a frozen date in time for your process, I would just make that known somewhere, right? We're selecting eligibility as of this date. And then moving from there, because of course, Title IV eligibility can change. It fluctuates based on whatever part of the enrollment period that we're in. So I would at least just make that clear, document it, and work within that if you need to.
I'd say that's probably a pretty good spot. Any closing comments, statements from Jim, Christina, or even Bill? Open that up as well to any of you.
I mean, I'll just make a brief comment and then certainly would like Bill and Christine to add anything. I mean, I just want to, it's been a real privilege of mine to work with institutions of higher education for the better part of 20 years, but I do not see any of you right now. I think this is an incredibly challenging environment for everyone, but particularly in higher education. And the fact that you're dealing with this on top of new Title IX regulations, on top of just day-to-day disruption we're all facing, is almost unfair, maybe even unfair. So, you know, I'm really honored that we were able to speak with you today. I hope this was helpful. And I hope everyone gets some rest this long weekend.
Yeah, I echo everything Jim says. I mean, what everyone is currently dealing with, it's difficult, and the department's manner of processing these funds in particularly has made this even more difficult. And so if it feels a bit like a roller coaster, I can tell you you're not alone, right? And sometimes that's just good to know. So what I would just suggest is, you know, take it a step at a time. You know, for every piece of expense or funds that you want to use, just take a walk through. Just start with the act, then go to the certification, and you know, then and thereafter, if you need to, go to the letters and the FAQs. But just walk it down and try and make the simplest, cleanest argument, and then document it. That will help make the roller coaster flatten out just a little bit. So.
Well, you got
Thank
30
you.
seconds.
And I will be fast. Thanks everyone for giving us your time this Friday afternoon. As you can see, the weekend is starting behind me. Thanks to Christina and Jim. Really appreciate your expertise. Listen, we care about our students. They have barriers and hard times even without this. So we're really trying to, you know, use every opportunity we possibly can to make things a little easier for them and for our employees as well. So your advice and insights, I think, were really helpful. Thank you.
Right. Again, I say the same thing. Thank you, Jim. Christina, it's been fantastic. And we've had the pleasure of being able to work alongside them a little bit more. So we know what skills and knowledge they bring to the table. So their information is on the screen. We'll get the information out of the presentation, and some of the follow-up questions we'll be able to deliver that to you all And with that, we appreciate your time and enjoy your weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.